funny. The problem with it I had was it was distracting. And it also, I mean, and the detail was too much. I mean, you could see the pores on Gandalf's nose. You could, in a lot, and not just Gandalf. You know, sorry, Sir Ian McKellen.
Yeah, you're beautiful.
I know you watch this.
Just so you know, you're beautiful. We love you as an actor. Fantastic.
But you could see pores, a lot of pores. You know, which then also made the makeup kind of obvious. You know, because a lot of the dwarves had prosthetics.
Yes, and you could see...
And you'd see pores on the cheeks, and then their nose would be completely clean. And then you'd see, you know, pores on the upper lip, and then the lower jaw, the lower, you know, the chin was completely clean.
Mm-hmm.
And you started to noticing. You could see, in some scenes, you could see Ian McKellen's contact lenses.
Yes, and not just his, but in the close-ups, I almost always saw a contact lens,
right?
Especially if they were color correcting an eye,
right?
And then the other thing that really looked wrong to me was like we said earlier, the end here. Instead of focusing on the story, you're like, why does this look wrong? What is that? You know, you're not focusing on the movie. You're focusing on the details so much that it draws away from the storyline.
And I was, you know, going, oh, that's a set. And in some areas where they're shooting outside, but they layered the image to make it not New Zealand, but Middle Earth, it was like, okay, so the foreground is a real place, but the background is obviously CG. I mean, that's how detailed it got, is you could see the separation between real and what they added. So that would be a lot of concerns to me, because I don't want you looking at, you know, you should see the background, but the background needs to support the story.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be a pretty background for a pretty scene that's moving and that gives you information. You should be watching the movie, not just going, oh, look at how great that CG Rivendell is in the background. You know?
You should be focused on the emotions in the story. You should be focused on the story, not just the individual things like, oh, look, they're wearing contact lenses, or he's obviously wearing a prosthetic beard and hairpiece, you know, and prosthetic nose. And I think the other thing that's going to make some determination, like from a financial standpoint, is with so many few actual theater houses having a projector that can do 48 frames per second, it may be something that, you know, we would consider, because obviously as the technology gets better and people start going to these films more and more often, and more films are made in that particular style, there'll be more theater houses for that. But I think if we're filming, you know, this year or next, and it comes out the following year, it may not be.
Well, the nice part about being on the front edge of technology is that if there's a house that has it, the exhibitor wants material for it.
True.
So if you bring out a high frame rate 3D film, you have a certain number of houses you can book in pretty quickly.
Yeah. As
long as you have a good distributor who's selling to it, which is a big part of the problem. And so, I mean, that's the whole reason, you know, that people went 3D so quickly, was you had exhibitors who put in 3D systems that wanted material.
And they needed something to fill those seats.
And so if you have, you know, if a theater has 3 3D houses and 9 standard 2D houses, and you have a 3D film, and there's not another 3D film coming out that week, you'll probably get 3 houses, because they want to use the technology and they want to make the extra money off the premium 3D price. So there is a benefit to that, but you want your audience immersed.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that high frame rate 3D I found to be very distracting, and it kept me out of some of the big story moments. You know, so I mean, that's what I have to look at. One of the things, in January, they're going to put out, American Cinematographer is going to put out their Hobbit article on how they shot it, and I think I'm going to pick up that issue so I can look at it and see what filters they use on it. It looked like they didn't use any neutral density. It looked very bright to me. It looked, you know, and it looked very overlit. And part of that is so bright, you know, if there's a strong key and a strong backlight, you can see it. You know what I mean? It's just so glaring. Whereas usually if you're shooting on film at 24 frames per second, You're gonna put down neutral density filters to bring the light down so it blends a little bit better. You get a little bit better picture. You know, you compress your depth of field. Everything looked in focus in that movie, which isn't bad. I mean, I'm not trying to say it's bad, but in that kind of detail, in that kind of environment where those pictures are going by so fast and you're getting all that detail, it was a little much for me. And
I think it's a little distracting as well. But I like so you definitely get taken away from where you should be immersed in that story. You're more focused on the actors and the setting than the story itself.
And then I think too, one of the things is, you know, did they use white pro mist filters? Because the pore issue and the skin imperfection issue, even though I don't think any of the actors have skin imperfections, but if you have a small blemish, when you project someone up to, you know, 30 feet tall in a theater, you know, a pore becomes the size of a pen. You know what I mean? And it, you know, we usually fight that with makeup, and the slower frame rate didn't pick it up as much, and lighting. But in The Hobbit, you know, when you're running that fast, all that detail comes out, and you can start to see it. White Pro Mist filters were specifically designed to make the skin look as good as possible. Might not have been able to do that with The Hobbit because of the large depth of field. Because if you have a depth of field that goes all the way to the lens, you're going to see the filter. Especially a white Pro Mist or a black Pro Mist filter. So if, you know, they may not have been able to use it, but, you know, if you can get that technology to where you can get down to an f4, you know, where it's most lenses are designed to give you the best picture around that stop, you know, allowing that much light in, and you put and it gets your depth of field down. You put a white Pro Mist filter on it. It might actually look really good.
Yeah.
I mean, so that might be a little too technical for most people watching this, but I really want to see what they did, so then I can figure out how do we get those great fight scenes and those great sweeping shots, because our film really needs some of that, you know. And it would be a challenge to do it in standard 3D. Our film really needs some of that. How do we do it and do it well and get people into the film if we use high frame rate 3D?
Yeah.